Welcome to another episode of This Week in Mishnah Yomi. Congratulations to all of us learning Mishnah Yomi, as we just finished Demai and moved on to Kilayim. I wanted to point out a topic that is referenced briefly here in the 7th chapter of Demai, Mishnah Daled. Somebody has wine that belonged to a kuti. So this Mishnah tells us that wine that belongs to a kuti is definitely tevel. It's not demai. So who are the kutis? Who are the kutim? Where do they come from? Why might we think that their wine is not tevel? Are they Jews? Are they goyim, non-Jews? So that'll be the topic of this week's Twimi, this week in Mishnah Yomi. So a lot of this can be found in Malachim Bet, chapter 17. There in Malachim Bet, it tells us about the dispersal, the exile of the 10 tribes. At that time, the Assyrian king, after relocating the 10 tribes, brought in other nations, other people from other places into Israel to replace where the 10 tribes were living. And at first, there was this, the Torah, the Tanakh tells us, the Navi tells us that at first the land would not accept these new people, that Hashem allowed lions to come and kill many of these newcomers that were replacing the members of the 10 lost tribes. But then they got scared and they turned to the king, the Assyrian king. The Assyrian king brought a Kohen, matter of discussion what exactly this Kohen was, to teach them. And then they taught them, it seems like they were exposed to some Judaism, and out of fear, they converted, such that, according to the Pasuk in Malachim Bet, they were fearing God, and also serving their idols. This led to the nomenclature that they were called Gerei Arayim, that they became converts because they were afraid of what was happening with the lions, Arayot, from Ari, that had come and devoured many of them. They converted to Judaism to avoid that plague. So what exactly were they practicing? Who exactly was this Kohen that came and taught them something about Judaism? So some suggest that there was a pagan priest that came and taught them some sort of combination of Judaism and paganism, what is called in other areas of halacha shituf, a partnership between the true God and other gods, which of course is certainly avodah zarah for the Jewish people. A bit of a discussion, a matter of dispute, whether that constitutes avodah zarah for non-Jews. A conversation about Christianity ensues from there. But this is who they are. This is who the kutim are. People, non-Jews, who had taken the place of the 10 lost tribes, and out of fear of what was happening, end up converting, with a difference of opinion as to whether were they always practicing shituf, a illegitimate form of monotheism, or did they at one point in time completely convert sincerely, and then only later go back to their ways, go back to the idolatry that they were familiar with? In Sefer Ezra, we learn about the kutim again, as people who had first offered to help Ezra and the remnants that had returned from Bavel to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, but then unfortunately changed their minds. And the descendants of these people are called kutim in the Talmud, because one of the original locations that the Assyrian king went to fill the northern kingdom after the Jews were exiled was Kuta. Some suggest a majority of these people were from Kuta, and therefore, even though they were from other places as well, the corpus of these people, all of them began to be referred to as Kutim. They're also called Shomronim because some of them were from the Shomron. That's where they were living. And today, that's the term we're more familiar with of those people who have a similar background, the Samaritans. The halacha today may not be exactly the same, or as the discussion we're going to discuss, the conversation and the disputes that we'll discuss concerning the early Kutim, but nonetheless, there is a continuum between the Kutim of old and the Shomronim, the Samaritans of today. Now, some Jews, even Kohanim, intermarried with Kutim. And what we know about, because they were in the vicinity of one another, and what we know about Kutim is that they were only careful with Torah Shebechtav. More precisely, only the 5 books of the Chumash. They did not find lessons or values from the rest of Nach, nor did they find binding any of the halachot that we follow from Torah Shebaal Peh. Their Jerusalem was Har Gerizim. In fact, Megillat Tanit tells us one of the days that had once been a holiday was a day on which the Kutim had asked Alexander of Macedon to destroy the Beit HaMikdash. And the plot was foiled. And on the day that the plot was foiled, a minor holiday was declared, and it is recorded in Megillat Tanit. So we see that Kutim were antagonistic towards Jews, even if there was some sort of conversion, some sort of interest study of Judaism. On a whole, there's suspicion and towards the Kutim, quite possibly because of the antagonism that was shown by the Kutim towards the Jewish people. Now, the Talmud discusses whether this original conversion of the Gerei Arayot, because they were scared of being eaten by lions, was that a halachically legitimate conversion? Rabbi Shmuel says Gerei Arayot are like Goyim. It doesn't count. They didn't convert for the right reasons, and they never abandoned their pagan worship, and therefore they are not real converts. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that the Kutim that Gerei Arayot are in fact Gerei Emet. Yerushalmi quotes this in between opinion that perhaps they are doubtful Jews, a Jew misafek. In general, we consider Gerei Arayot, at least the early versions in the times of the Talmud, as considered legitimate. However, the Rishonim discuss 2 different types of Gerei Arayot. This becomes important to consider as a fundamental principle as we consider conversion candidates in our times. One type of candidate of conversion, let's say of the Kutim, was that they, even when they dipped in the mikvah, even when they accepted Judaism, they did so while continuing to serve Avodah Zarah. Not one moment existed when they had not whether they had rejected completely Avodah Zarah. And that would be a type of Gerei Arayot, which would not be legitimate, which would be invalid. That would also be a problem in contemporary conversion situations. If a person, for not a moment, ever abandons their pagan ways, not for a moment ever accepts Torah and all of the requirements contained therein, if not even for a moment were they willing to accept it, that becomes that makes the conversion completely illegitimate. However, a type that would be good is if the Gerei Arayot, if the Kutim originally accepted Torah mitzvot, and then over time they went back to their ways. It's the idea that just as a Jew who sins, even with Avodah Zarah, is considered still a Jew, you don't give up your Jewishness, so too a sincere convert, if they go back to pagan ways, let's say at the times of the Kutim, then they would be considered like a Yisrael Mumar, a heretical Jew, still a Jew. We treat them differently. We may have certain stringencies, but nonetheless, they are still considered Jewish. So to the Kutim, if their original conversion was sincere, then what happened afterwards does not take away from their full Jewish status. Nonetheless, this remains a discussion within the Rishonim and the Achronim, dealing with those original types of kutim. We consider them to be illegitimate converts and therefore completely non-Jewish. We consider them to be not fully Jewish, but not fully non-Jewish. We consider them to be fully Jewish with certain restrictions and certain issues. When there are certain halachot that are quoted that seem paradoxical, almost contradictory. Let me give you an example. According to one strain of thought, a kuti who married a Jewish woman, that marriage would be chal. It would work. However, the woman who married the kuti man would have violated the prohibition of intermarriage. So the marriage is good. You need to get a get to resolve the marriage or to dissolve the marriage because the kuti might be Jewish, but the kuti might not be Jewish, and therefore they violate the lotit chatain. They're not of intermarrying, right? This is the idea that a kuti is Jewish l'chumra. We consider the marriage good, and we also consider it to be intermarriage. A fascinating idea that really only makes sense within the halachic realm of the kuti of being machmir on both, of being stringent on both sides. Now, what's interesting to note is that whereas we might think that in the machloket Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael that we mentioned before, Rabbi Akiva says that the kutim are real Jews, and Rabbi Yishmael says they're not real Jews. But Rabbi Akiva, who seems to be the more sensitive, inclusive, welcoming position, later on ends up being a chumrah. Because if in fact they are Jews, fully Jewish, and if in fact they do not abide by the Torah Shabbal Peh, what emerges is that their marriages might have been, their marriages would have been halachically valid, but their divorces were not, which leads to the serious problem of mamzerut. And that's why Rabbi Akiva, who holds that their conversions were valid, they're fully Jewish, says that they cannot marry into the Jewish people because of the possibility or even probability that the descendants are mamzerim. And even if there's a possibility that there's a suffix mamzerut, that would still be a problem of a kuti marrying a full-fledged Jew. Today, to fast forward a little bit, the Achronim that dealt with this question in the more modern times consider the kuti today, the Samaritan today, to be fully non-Jewish. And therefore, we're not concerned that they might be a mamzer. They're a guy, they're not a mamzer, and therefore they can convert to Judaism without any concern. So again, it's a little counterintuitive, but if you consider a kuti to be a Jew, you have fated them to not be able to marry into the Jewish people because they might be a mamzer. If you say that they're goyim, it seems to be harsh, but it allows them, it gives them a pathway, a journey to become full-fledged members of the Jewish people by undergoing a halakhically legitimate conversion. Ending with a little bit of the Mishnah that we had in Demai, a kuti's produce is considered like a non-Jew's produce and is completely teva. Now you might ask, Truma and Meiser are mentioned in the Torah, so why don't we think that the kuti would have separated those things? The answer is that even it might be that the kuti, that the produce that the kuti eats himself will have Truma and Meiser separated from it, but the produce that a kuti sells to a Jew or gives to a Jew, or even gives to a Jew and says it Truma and Meiser is taken, we do not believe that. Because as we've seen from the story of Ezra, not only are we concerned with the status of the kuti, but we're also concerned with the antagonism that the kuti may have towards Jewish people and looking to undermine the halachic system and make Jews sin in ways such as eating tevel. So even if a kuti tells you that it has been tithed, you don't believe it. It's never demai. The produce of a kuti is always going to be tevel, which should have the gifts, Truma and Meiser, taken off of them because of this concern that they're looking to undermine the halachic system based on Torah Shabbal Peh. The Medrash Tanchuma states that when the Kutim sabotaged the construction of the Beit HaMikdash, Ezra put them in Cherem, which could be the basis of some of the stringencies that surround the Kuti. And so Kuti is a fascinating study of halacha, of certain cases where you can have a position where a status of chumrah of Chumrah, whereby you have a paradox where the Kuti marriage to a Jewish woman is chal, and yet the woman violates intermarrying. Right, that's an interesting outcome of this status of the Kuti not being clarified. And also, it's an interesting study where a seemingly chumrah leads to a kula and vice versa. Rabbi Kiva, who seems to be welcoming the Kuti, ends up distancing himself from the Kutim because since they might be Jews, they also might be mamzerim. Whereas Rabbi Yishmael says they're for sure goyim, which opens the path towards conversion and fully integrating within the Jewish community. And lastly, this idea of the Kuti might be an archetype of those who are within the Jewish community, or at least close to the Jewish community, but nonetheless antagonistic. We have to be on the lookout. We have to be aware of the attitude of a Kuti, that sometimes other nations are looking to get close to the Jewish people, but at the same time may still be antagonistic towards them, and certainly towards our values and towards our principles and towards those things that we hold dear. Cautionary note about the Kuti, as well as the fascinating halachic background of the status of a Kuti. Thank you so much for joining me for this week in Mishnah Yomi. I hope you join me again next time.